Joining us in studio for more on this is Mamadou Biteye, the MD of the Rockefeller Foundation. Many thanks for joining us in studio for this conversation. Now, like the story we just ran there, post-harvest losses remain a big challenge, not just in East Africa, but in Africa as a whole. I mean, in Kenya and Tanzania, I understand the farmers lose about 40% of their produce in post-harvest losses. How big a situation is this?
Well, first, before talking to that, let me mention the element you showed earlier about the drought.
Right.
You know, food security or insecurity is a major problem in Africa and can be caused by various reasons, whether it is drought, extreme weather shocks, climate change, but also dependence on cash crops, etc.
Right.
And also civil unrest, war, conflict, as we've seen in Somalia, etc. But one of the most overlooked also reason is post-harvest loss. Post-harvest loss is not just a problem in Africa. It is more exacerbated in Africa, but it is really a global problem.
Right.
Estimates show that on average, 30% of everything we produce in the world never for food for human consumption never gets to be consumed. In Africa, you can say on average about 40%.
Right.
Obviously, this varies depending on the value chain, the type of crops. It is higher when you talk about fruits and vegetables than when you talk about cereals. But the problem is, this is not just a problem, but it is also a lost opportunity.
Right.
Because the amount of food that is actually being wasted or lost due to inefficiencies actually could feed the 1.2 billion hungry and undernourished people in the world, on the planet. And as you know, the majority of these people are here in Africa.
In Africa, right.
And luckily, this is a problem also that can be addressed. We have the knowledge, we have the technologies that can allow Africa and the world to address this overlooked problem.
And just before we get to the technology, when we speak of post-harvest losses, post-harvest can mean an array of things, from the harvesting to the transportation to the storage. Just take us through what aspects we're talking about.
Let me first say, because we talk about food waste and spoilage. So we need to differentiate that. Post-harvest loss is everything that is lost from the field to market. And this is due to improper harvesting techniques, lack of storage facilities, improper transportation, and sometimes also lack of access to markets. This is mainly a problem in the developing world. This is different from food waste. Food waste is mainly due to consumption preferences, the issues of ugly food, use by dates on products, etc., which causes perfectly usable food to be discarded because of that. This is a phenomenon that we observe mostly in developed nations.
Right.
But this is also something that we are increasingly seeing in Africa because of the growing middle class and the changing consumption habits that we see in cities as well. So these are the differences between these two concepts. So when we talk about now post-harvest management in general, or post-harvest loss, improper harvesting, lack of storage, etc., this is perfectly manageable by actually doing different things. First of all is to strengthen the human capital, meaning that actually farmers, particularly smallholder farmers, can be trained and increase their awareness on available, simple, often very simple technologies that can help them drastically cut these losses. Let me give an example of the work we do at the Rockefeller Foundation with our partners under our YieldWise initiative, which is a $130 million 7-year initiative, the first practical initiative to really cut food loss by 50%. And we're focusing on maize in Tanzania, mango in Kenya, and tomato and cassava in Nigeria. Why these crops? Because these crops actually represent the main crop categories, cereals and grains, fruits and vegetables, and roots and tubers. And we believe that the model that we are putting in place actually can work across all of these crop categories. And it really essentially boils into 4 things. One is really connecting restoring the broken links to market by connecting farmer produce actually to markets. And this requires, because our agriculture is mainly dependent on smallholder farmers, to be able actually to aggregate their produce and aggregate the farmers themselves, so that to be able to meet the quantity and quality requirements of the market. This is very important. And second, you can really use these aggregation points and the aggregation actually to train the farmers on the practices that would allow them to meet these quality requirements, but actually to reduce post-harvest loss by accessing to simple technology. For instance, hermetic storage for grains, like the triple layer simple bags, hermetic bags that cost on average $2 to $1, that can preserve grains over 12 to 18 months, and keeping bugs away, stopping the development of aflatoxin, which is also a major cause of food loss, etc. It is access, for example, here in Kenya, to simple technologies that can reduce mechanical damage on, for instance, mangoes, such as heavy molded plastic crates that can facilitate transportation and keep the produce in good condition. And thirdly, it is also about really linking these farmers to financing, because financing is really important, because that gives them the leverage to make decisions on when and how they go to market to sell their produce. But more importantly, it allows them also to be able to access these technologies. So that's what really YieldWise is. There are different models, but we believe that if you really want to address the issue of post-harvest loss, farmer training, access to technology, financing, and markets are really critical.
Right. And of course, in the reports that we read, the Rockefeller Foundation estimates that about 5%, only 5% of the resources are channeled towards post-harvest losses, post-harvest management, while 95% of it is, allocated to traditionally just, planting and increasing productivity. But is this necessarily a bad thing? Because many would feel to ensure food security, then let's increase food productivity.
No, actually that make really sense, because also we need to recognize that in Africa in general, actually we have a gap in the yields. The yields are not really high. Farmer productivity needs to be improved. And for that, actually good extension services, access to better quality agricultural inputs are critical. Actually, there is a lot of efforts being done by African nations and their partners actually to gain advances on that. But the point is, you can definitely, and it is important to invest in that, increasing productivity and production. But at the same time, it is important not to overlook the problem that makes that 1/3 of everything you produce is being lost on the other hand. So any gains that you might have from these investments are actually being lost if you don't safeguard it. Just think about this. Think about a situation where every time you opened your wallet, 1/3 of your money falls down.
I mean, I don't think anyone would want that happening.
That's exactly the big problem that exists in African agriculture and in general that nobody really talks about and nobody really addresses. So this is really extremely important to create that awareness, but also to ensure that significant investment is being put to preserving the production, the agricultural production, and making sure that it gets to market, because this has several implications in terms of increasing farmer income. Today, because of post-harvest loss, on average, and this is really a very conservative estimate, on average 15% of farmer income is lost. Second, there is investing in post-harvest loss gives also an opportunity really in developing a whole economy, particularly around small and medium enterprises, because you need to actually process the product. You need to, this is an opportunity also to invest in other services that allow access to market, access to technologies, access to information, etc. So a lot of small and medium enterprises can develop into that. And this provides also an opportunity for increased access to jobs for women, for the youth, actually. When we talk about youth returning to agriculture, it doesn't necessarily mean plowing or growing the food, but it is also bringing all the necessary support around agriculture, innovation that can allow really to develop agriculture and actually create prosperity.
Right. I mean, and that being said, when we began, you said post-harvest losses aren't just confined to Africa. It's a global issue. It's just that it happens more in Africa than in developed countries. But in a case for Kenya, for example, where then do we have the highest potential for loss that needs to be the first case to be addressed?
Well, actually, you know, as I said, loss is variable depending on crops. We have particularly chosen to work in Kenya in the mango value chain because we see that it is very important in the country. It's over 80,000 smallholder farmers across the country that distribute that. It is also, there is also the business opportunity for that, because several beverage companies actually are investing in producing still juices made of mango and other local fruits. So that provides stable market that can be accessed.
Right.
And this is something that we are working on, and we are seeing increased access to that market.
All right. And I'm sorry, Biteye, I'll have